any way round the Benn Act that you can see?
No, I think the Benn Act, and let's call it the Benn Act and not some of the horrible things that it's been called. It was drafted with great care after a great deal of cooperation across the House of Commons, and it's very, very specific and explicit about a personal duty on the Prime Minister to either get a deal through the House of Commons or persuade the House of Commons that no deal is plausible, or he has to write a letter. The letter has been drafted and attached to the Act to the European Union asking for more time.
And you've seen what he said to the Scottish Court of Session, which implies that he will send that letter.
Well, he speaks with forked tongue, though, doesn't he? Because he says one thing to the court and another thing to you, for example. On your programme last week, I obviously watched that interview with great care. He seems to have a very casual relationship with the law. He seems to think that he's above the law, as the Supreme Court showed us a few weeks ago. He is not. No one is above the law, even a British Prime Minister.
So there is very little time left in the House of Commons next week before the next prorogation, ahead of the Queen's speech. Well, how are you going to use that time? Is it trying to get the full publication of the government's proposals to the EU so we can see actually every dot and comma of what they're suggesting?
I think it would be very important to see what Boris Johnson thinks a deal looks like. At the moment,
so the legal text.
I think that would be really important. If he's trying to get this deal through the House of Commons, they have to see it, and that's what the Benn Act requires. So I think, yes, that would be important. The difficulty that we have is, what do you do when you are dealing with a Prime Minister who is prepared to disobey the law?
We'll come on to that in a moment. But your priority is presumably to stop no deal at
Correct.
all costs.
Absolutely.
Why, therefore, is the Labour Party, certainly Jeremy Corbyn, already saying that the Labour Party will vote against this new deal before you've even seen it? If Boris Johnson, and we've heard the Prime Minister of Latvia there, if Boris Johnson gets something that is agreed by the EU and with which Dublin is happy and takes it back to the House of Commons, surely the Labour Party at that point would vote for it.
Well, what he's currently proposing cannot get through, because what he's currently proposing jeopardises the Good Friday Agreement and rights and protections that Ireland and the rest of the EU will insist on as well as us.
Things might change. I mean, he's called this a landing zone. There's clearly wriggle room. The movement on both sides is going to happen over the next few days. I say again, if he brings back a deal that's agreed in Brussels and agreed in Dublin, it's inconceivable, surely, the Labour Party would whip against it.
Well, it seems to me that if he is to get something through in Dublin and Brussels, it would be something that is more likely to meet our tests. For example,
so you could let a deal through in those circumstances.
Well, what I'm saying is that we have a common interest in the Labour Party with the interest in Ireland and elsewhere, in that we want to protect rights and protections. I looked at the American Food and Drug Administration website yesterday, and in the American scheme, you're allowed to have traces of rat hairs and droppings and insects in foodstuffs. That is just not allowed in Europe, and we don't want that in Britain.
Jeremy Corbyn said last week that this was a terrible deal, and that there's no way that any Labour MP could support such a reckless deal that would be used as a springboard to attack rights and standards in this country.
Exactly.
But he may well come back with a deal that has been agreed on both sides. And I want to be absolutely clear, because it's very important for everybody watching, for people who want to get a deal. In those circumstances, surely at the last minute you'd let that deal through.
The deal that he's currently proposing, that is not going down very well in Brussels or in Dublin or with us, is a deregulatory deal that business in this country doesn't want, that trade unions don't want, that climate change activists don't want, and people that care about medicines and foods don't want. He has got to move. He has got to compromise in the national and international interest if he's going to get our support.
But you know there's quite a lot of Labour MPs who are prepared to vote for a deal anyway. Caroline Flint suggested maybe 30 or 40 Labour MPs would do so. If that happened, would the Labour Party treat them as Boris Johnson treated his rebels and withdraw the whip and kick them out of the party?
I don't believe that there are 30 or 40 Labour MPs who would vote for any deal. They care as much as I do about rights and protections and food standards and so on.
But nonetheless, if they did, how would you punish them?
Well, I'm not a punisher, and I would never want our party to behave in the way that Boris Johnson did, for example, towards the 21 Liberal Conservatives who've been purged from that party.
They'll be relieved to hear it. Let me ask you again about the possible ways through that Boris Johnson might use, because it's been suggested, he's been talking with Hungarians and others, you could ask for the extension and then, as it were, tip off another European government to veto that extension. So, no, you can't have it.
So to be clear about that, if you send the letter, as you're required to under the law, and then seek to undermine it by other means, you have not kept faith with the law. You have not fulfilled your specific statutory duty to seek an extension. That would be unlawful conduct on his part. I know he has a very casual relationship with the law, but there we are.
Everybody is trying to work out what's going to happen next, see the way forward. And one of the possibilities, it may not be the likeliest, but one of the possibilities is a vote in the House of Commons of no confidence in Boris Johnson and the installation of a so-called government of national unity. Now, the problem there, as we know, both know, has been that Jeremy Corbyn insists on being the caretaker Prime Minister.
But he's leader of the opposition.
But the Liberal Democrats say they will not serve under him. So there is a problem here, and people have been talking about Kenneth Clarke and so forth. A new idea floated in the papers today is that John Bercow could be a caretaker Prime Minister to get us through that period. Would that be acceptable to the Labour Party?
I think this is, if I may say so, we're now getting into almost fantasy football. I don't really
You think it's not going to happen?
I think it's very unlikely. I really, really do. I think what we need to concentrate on is getting no deal ruled out, as the law already does, for the reasons we discussed,
even to stop
and then
no
to
deal,
head for a general election.
Even to stop no deal, Jeremy Corbyn will never stand aside and relinquish that position as caretaker Prime Minister to help it happen.
I'm not saying that. I just think that we're getting into a level of fantasy around these various permutations of unity governments that it's just not realistic, I think.
I talked at the beginning of the programme about, I think there's going to be an election quite soon. When do you think an election's going to happen?
I think realistically, once the Benn Act has been complied with, and okay, if Boris Johnson kicks and screams but complies with the law, that would be a good thing. He would at least have complied with the law. Once that's done, then I think we're looking realistically at a general election, certainly this side of Christmas, hopefully substantially before Christmas.
So probably a November election, that kind of thing, or early December.
I would hope so.
Let me ask you about something